Hello, this is Mike Schesinger from Sony Pictures, and for the next few minutes I'm going to yammer on about Magoo's Private War, one of the more unusual entries in the series. It's a very bipolar cartoon in a way. It's a little bit of a cheater. There's some stock footage in it, live action. Magoo is really the only character on screen for much of the time, and it's very short, even including the titles. It's only 6 minutes long. But there's an awful lot of interesting stuff going on in the script, and we're going to talk about that. First scene is Magoo with his nephew Waldo. Waldo normally was voiced by the fine character actor Jerry Hausner, but occasionally Dawes Butler would step in, and this is one of the 6 cartoons that he did do so. Now, as you can see, Waldo is very used to his uncle's machinations. You can see how he just doesn't even look up from his magazine as he hands him the helmet and kicks over the suitcase. Dawes Butler, of course, was the superstar voice for Hanna-Barbera.
From now on, it's going to be work, work, work.
The director of this cartoon was Rudy LaRiva, who was, this was only the 3rd cartoon he directed, and he was a veteran animator and director that worked at all the major studios, and his name has a little bit of infamy because he was the main director of a lot of the DePatie Freleng Looney Tunes of the 60s, including the Roadrunners, which were not very good, but that wasn't his fault. He did the best he could with what he had to work with, and he got a bit of a bum break. Now, as you can see, there's a big Hollywood premiere here at what Sam Kleinberger has definitely designed as Grauman's Chinese Theater, and you'll see more detail on that soon. The storyline here is basically Cold War paranoia. As a matter of fact, when I re-released Dr. Strangelove in 2004 for its 40th anniversary, I attached this cartoon as sort of a get in the mood kind of thing.
Undercover!
Obviously, we're supposed to think that the Russians are attacking, but of course, you can't really do that. So it's now a kind of a War of the Worlds scenario, with Magoo basically acting like somebody who had listened to Orson Welles' broadcast in 1938. Now, here we are inside Grauman's Chinese Theater, and as you can see, this is a very interesting detail. Now, again, we're talking about economy of animation. So the characters in the background, you'll notice, are static. This is just a single painting with no movement at all. Obviously, this was an economy measure, but if you wanted to be generous, you could interpret this as sort of the prevailing attitude of the 50s, where you just sort of put blinders on and don't pay attention to what's happening outside. They're so absorbed in the movie that they don't even notice this crazy man lying in the aisle screaming at each other.
Oh, you great Scott! Dirt, Magoo.
With this old lady here, he's directly interacting with them. The script for this cartoon was written by 3 men, Dick Shaw, who was a regular story man at UPA, but the other 2 were Fred DeGorter and Jack Gross Jr. This is the only cartoon they ever wrote, and they had very few credits after this in the 60s. So one wonders if maybe they were the ones that sort of brought this kind of sensibility to the story. This idea is that, hey, maybe we're being a little more upset than we need to be.
I'll have this out in no time. I've got to get that idiot out.
So here's more stock footage, and here's Magoo in front of the cartoon, in front of the screen rather. And again, this is also a very Hitchcockian touch, because in a lot of his pictures, in a lot of pictures that wanted to be Hitchcock pictures, you would see the characters in a movie theater, either in front of the screen or behind the screen. A great example of that is Saboteur, which actually takes place in Radio City Music Hall in New York. Now again, all this World War II stock footage is just basically a time and money saver because it's less stuff to animate, even though in most cases, as you can see, Magoo is the only person who's moving. What's interesting is that because there is so little actual animation in this, Magoo is the only character who's moving much of the time, is that a great burden falls on Jim Backus, because it's his voice that has to carry this along. And he's doing it pretty much by himself because we hardly have any other voices. And he's reacting to an occasional person who comes up. And then, of course, there's the boom, boom, boom of the stock footage.
Oh, it's all over. It's all over but the shouting.
And here he is just, making noise. And again, nobody's paying attention to him. And this kind of fits into the sensibility of UPA. They always had a progressive tilt, and I think here the McCarthy era wasn't quite over. So they were still attacking that kind of ideology in very subtle ways, kind of in the way Rod Serling would soon do in The Twilight Zone, by disguising stories as fantasy and analogy. It's also important to remember that this is really the heyday of science fiction movies. In fact, Columbia had just the year before made Earth versus the Flying Saucers, the Ray Harryhausen picture, and another Ray Harryhausen picture called 20 Million Miles to Earth. So aliens were very much on people's minds.
Over.
Nice little touch here with him standing on a stack of newspapers, reminding us again what a small man he is.
Clear thinking. Oh, great balls of fire!
And now we're about to go into the here we go again ending. So it really never stops, sometimes even in real life. Well, as another Jim Backus character would say, thanks awful for listening. It's the only way to fly.